Hello everyone, Santa here and welcome to RPG Maker. So, I have been doing some thinking about what I want to do on Sunday. Part of it is because I am now streaming Guild Wars on Twitch on currently Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we'll see where things go from there. But that means that I kind of have that as an outlet for playing Guild Wars 1. So, I thought, what could I do on Sundays that would be interesting, that would be something that would be good for me to do as well. And what I decided on was I want to make games. That's something that I want to do, and sometimes I'm not the best at actually allocating time to doing it, just because I find I make myself so busy with things I'm trying to do otherwise. Whether that's doing stuff on my Patreon or trying to figure out video stuff here, working on the Guild Wars 1 skill review project that should be coming to a close in a couple of weeks. Has been absorbing a lot of time. So I've just been trying to figure out what would be interesting. I thought, oh wait, if I make making games something there, then that's something that can be a process that helps me actually do the thing that I want to do and can be something that can be interesting to share with people. So I don't want to position myself as any sort of expert or anything. I have some experience with making stuff, but for the most part, I wish this had a proper hold down the middle mouse button to scroll, but it uses... So RPG Maker MV, for those who don't know, is a tool for making RPG games. The engine is written in JavaScript. You can make plugins to extensively modify it. And I think if you are not doing that, you miss out on a lot of its potential power. So I don't necessarily view myself as an expert. It's up to you what you think of my abilities and all that sort of stuff. I've never actually finished a game in RPG Maker because I always find I get myself bogged down somewhere. So this is really important for understanding how I'm trying to approach making this, because what ends up happening inevitably is I, at some point, get bogged down in a bunch of design documentation. I try to come up with ideas for how things work and world building and character creation in terms of who are the characters going to be and all sorts of stuff. So I've had different approaches where I just start building something and then I'm oh, now I need a plot, and everything gets really complicated really quickly because I've made too many different characters, or I end up just getting caught up in a lot of that design process and then not really putting the time towards it to figure out some of the harder details or to go through the work of making things. So what I'm doing with this one is just let's make stuff and then kind of flesh out the story from some of those. So to give a little bit of an overview of the general world idea here, I'm calling this project Astral Collision, which you can see there, or on this lovely screen that I've made that's probably way too busy, although less busy than the original one. Thanks, NVIDIA. So the idea here is that there are 14 different worlds that have all collided together in a giant mishmash of old-timey stuff and futuristic sci-fi stuff or whatever, modern stuff. So for example, the thought is this area, well, it just kind of mushed together and a bunch of buildings got kind of destroyed in that process and it's been real ugly. And just different things like that. So the reason why I chose the number 14, if I didn't mention that already, 14 different places that got mushed together, roughly, is because when we go to the introduction, what you'll see here is my mascot, but you'll see 14 characters here, 6 here, and 2 here in the middle. And so these are the potential party members. I'm going to go very light on what they can actually do as my plan, but I've created backstory for them. And that backstory, so the Angel of Selection is just the character that you use to select your 4 party members. And then we have these different characters that I've been fleshing out. And the idea here is you pick which 4 you want to bring with you, and then you'll go journeying around defeating bosses and whatever else other things I end up filling in. But I really want to do this where I put stuff together and then build layers of story on top of things. That's the general direction that I want to go. I know the general gist of what I want to do with things as well is that, these are all prophets that prophesied about the Astral Collision event. So this is kind of like the general backstory of what I'm trying to do here. And this Astral Collision event, I've written about it in this journal plugin that I wrote. So if you look at all these plugins, all the ones that start with Ciantier plus AC modifications, which are specific modifications for this RPG, are plugins that I've written over here in Notepad++. So there's a bunch of different stuff here that changes how a lot of different things work. So, for example, this whole function right here, calc weapon damage, is just used inside the... it is a very long function. It's just used inside the... Can I? No, I have to close this one. It's used inside the skills thing for attacks. So calc weapon damage will perform that calculation, and it pulls a bunch of metadata from... So one of the things that you're going to quickly learn about RPG Maker is that its interface is very specific, and so the ability to add modular stuff is done through... a good example of this is going to be states. It's done through these tags right here. So like this says type : condition. This has labeled this as, like, this will provide a thing that I can access that makes this have a type of condition. So I will be able to go in to something and go, for example, I can add damage min add right here. So armors I.meta. So this meta variable will then get this added, and it'll have that information in it. A really good example of this actually is, where do I grab it? Right here. Damage min and damage max. This is taken from the weapon. So if I go to weapons, you'll see that they have damage min and damage max values and a critical value. That critical value is used for the multiplier. Down here. So if you made a critical hit, then we're going to set our damage to be the high roll value and not somewhere in between. Like if it's not a crit, then, which is what's done right here, then the damage is just a random integer inclusively between damage low and damage high. So inclusive and exclusive are really important on random rolls. Inclusive means that it includes both it will include that value. So usually it's going to be inclusive on the minimum and then exclusive on the maximum, which means it is every value up to but not including that maximum one, which is useful for randomly accessing arrays, because arrays.length, arrays are usually zero indexed in programming. So that means if you have 100 items in the array, then the indexes for those items are going to be 0 to 99. So picking a random number between 0 and up to the length just makes it a little bit more efficient in terms of, like, you can just go array index random dot array dot length. I guess I could, instead of gesticulating wildly with my arms, it'd be something like array index random dot next, for example. Sometimes it'll just be like array dot length like this, and you can do something like that to get a random item from the array. But anyway, this is inclusive, so if you make a critical hit, instead it grabs the critical information. If it's an actor, then, which means it's a party member, then it grabs their weapon and then is like, okay, did I find a weapon? If so, then I grab its critical metadata, if that exists, and then I evaluate that to get it into a number form and make that my critical multiplier, and then multiply the damage base by it to get my critical hit damage. Otherwise, I just multiply it by 1.5 if you're just punching things. Whereas enemies have their critical data built into the enemy and all that sort of stuff. Excuse me. Other things, like I've adjusted how determining who goes first works, because I didn't want to attach to agility because I'm remapping all of my stats. I have a cap for HP regeneration to 25% of your maximum. And that's clamped basically negative cap, positive cap. And then Earth is one of the attributes. You'll see that later. I'm just kind of going over what I'm doing with this and what some of my intentions are. So Earth is one of your attributes. So the idea is you have strength, dexterity, and then the 4 like traditional elements of earth, water, air or wind or whatever you want to call it, and fire. And earth gives you bonus HP regeneration, and water gives you bonus MP regeneration. And then your maximum TP is based on attack is strength and def is dexterity. So it's based on your strength, your dexterity, and your fire for your maximum. More heavily, obviously, on attack and defense. This whole thing adds up to 3 parts. The amount of physical damage you do, if I did this correctly, increases with strength, and magical damage increases with fire. There's a whole system there. I take critical hits and I just process them kind of separately because I didn't want to use the built-in critical hit methodology that RPG Maker uses. So I had to change how the damage formula is evaluated so you get a crit variable that gets passed in. I adjusted... Did I adjust anything with your accuracy? I think I might have, but not here. I think I did to the hit variable. Right here you get native evasion based on your dexterity. So the more dexterity you have, the more evasive you are. The critical hit chance also increases with the... So variance is... if we go into skills, this right here is the variance. So that property I have modified to increase your critical hit chance with that particular skill. So individual skills can have higher crit chance. And then dexterity also increases your crit chance. This right here was a big complicated thing of applying, basically determining whether or not you hit. So I've changed the way hitting and all that sort of stuff works to basically be like you have an accuracy roll. But one of the things that really bothers me in RPGs, Pokemon is a really good example of this, is when your random hit chance has a binary result. So, for example, Thunder in Pokemon has 70% accuracy, but it either hits or it doesn't. So that outcome is binary. So either you got the 70% chance to hit or you got the 30% chance to miss, but it's an extreme in terms of the outcomes. You can't miss by a little bit. So what I have going on here with this system, which the comments here might describe. Green text is comments, for those who may not know. I know this is a lot of like code and stuff. But what basically goes on with this system is I take the hit chance of the thing and mush it together with your hit chance. This is a linear interpolation. It doesn't look like it because one of these is like 0 to 1, and it makes it look a little wonky. But basically, what I end up doing is I take your hit chance, and I use that with... So where's the final bit here? I modify the... So if you fail to hit below 10%, then you just miss. And likewise, if the enemy evades well enough, then they can evade the attack. But generally what ends up happening is right down here, you can see this value times hit mult down here. That's all highlighted green because it's highlighting all things with that name that I've double-clicked, or selected, I should say. So if you miss to a degree or get evaded, all it does is decrease the damage. On the other hand, really bad evasion or really good accuracy can increase the damage you do with attacks. So damage variance with attacks is modified by your accuracy and the enemy's evasion. So in other words, evasion decreases the damage you take. Lack of accuracy decreases the damage you deal in kind of a scaling fashion, or increases it depending upon how things go, rather than outright making you deal no damage or take no damage or whatever. So accuracy and evasion and stuff are, they work a bit differently in this system. This is important for understanding things like skill balance and all that sort of stuff. Other things that are going on, right here, we see this line. So this is the guard effect. So if you're guarding, then if you have one guard effect, then you'll take damage divided by 2. which is half damage, but also subtracts off your strength stat from the damage that you take. So higher strength means that your guard is more effective. So naturally, RPG Maker has some effects with luck built in. So having higher luck decreases the likelihood that you'll be affected by status conditions and increases the likelihood that you'll inflict states, basically. And so I didn't want any of that because it's not luck in my system. And right here is where I define a bunch of stuff. So I define strength as being the same thing as attack, dex as being the same thing as defense, fire as being the same thing as magic attack, magic defense is earth, agility is wind, and luck is water. So I've added aliases, I guess you could say, to those. Then there's a bunch of other random things that I've modified. So this right here makes it so that way. Actually, probably the best way of explaining what that section of code does is to just show you. I do want to get some of my plugins up on GitHub at some point in time, by the way. It's not something that I've done at this point in time because I'm just beginning to look into that. Should probably look into it a while ago, but whatever, here we are. Oh, I'm not in a good spot to... Let me adjust my starting position for the player to be here. So that way I can properly demonstrate what that does. So I'm just kind of giving you an overview of everything that I've done. I'm not sure what I'll do today, but if I go to skills, you'll see that that has a little circle, or it has this icon next to it. That is what that code does. If I had... this character might not actually have any skills, yeah. If I had a skill that cost both TP and MP, it would show both of them next to each other, which the game, RPG Maker's engine does not do by default. By default, it only shows MP, I think, if you have both. But this code will set it up so that way it'll show both. This right here, what this does is it changes the number of visible rows in the equip screen. So... again, I can demonstrate what this means. Over here, if I go to equip, you'll see that there are... This here has a bunch of different stuff. But also over here on the left side, you'll see have my max MP, or HP and MP, as well as strength, dexterity, fire, earth, wind, and water. Normally, these would not have drawn, and I modified the code to draw those as well. I don't have an armor stat in this game. You may or may not have seen that in the comments at the top of this. This right here, by the way, all this does is make it draw the HP and the maximum HP and maximum MP. But if we go to the top here, you'll see this note. Need to figure out how out damage formula stuff. How should armor work? And then I decided that I'm not going to have a defensive stat, like a straight defensive stat, other than HP. Technically, so like I say, technically evasion can decrease the damage you take, which is true. Arwayne right here is just another game, another RPG I've been trying to work on, but I got bogged down in design and it never got anywhere. So, technically you can use the physical damage multipliers and the state rates. So if I go to say, I don't know, does this have... There's hit rate, which is accuracy, target rate. Magic evasion is sort of, like, these are sort of pseudo decreases. This can decrease damage by up to 5%. Although if their accuracy is bad enough, it could just miss. But if I were to go to, where's armors? So, like, right here, this is slashing damage times 80%, piercing times 80%, striking times 90%. That's going to decrease the damage you take from those damage types. So that does kind of factor in, but there's no straight-up defensive stat other than HP. So I wanted to focus on, let's not worry about all these sort of defensive things. Things just, like, deal a certain amount of damage. And as you level up, you get more and more HP, and that's how you get more and more defensive. So what that means is that to evaluate the quality of armor, you need to be able to see how much HP it gives you. If you can't see how much HP you're getting from a piece of armor, then you cannot appropriately evaluate whether or not it's any good. So I really needed to make this screen display the amount of HP you were getting from your equipment and how much you'd lose if you took it off and things like that. Switched it for another piece of gear, more likely. So that was really important, and that was an important aspect of what I was trying to do with all of that. So I'm not going to go over all of the plugins in detail. This is the one that I'm probably going to muck around in the most if I do any more mucking around. I've kind of set it up the way I mostly want it. There's a bunch of additional attack properties. Furious, Zealous, and Vampiric are based off of the names for those sorts of modifiers in Guild Wars. Furious means you gain TP when you deal damage. Zealous means you gain or lose. It could be a negative number, but it affects it gives you energy when you hit. And Vampiric gives you HP when you hit. It's similar to the ideas of those modifiers for melee weapons in Guild Wars 1. There's advanced states, which allows protection type effects, and mostly that's primarily what it does, but it also allows states to be able to modify your stats in a more complex and nuanced way. State types adds types. Actually, it's probably better if I just go over here to plugins. So plugins that I've added, there's just the default ones. I have this made with MV thing off because if it's on, it shows a splash screen for being made with RPG Maker MV, which is really obnoxious when testing because it pops that up and then basically you have another splash screen you have to sit through on load, and you want to minimize that when you're testing and frankly when you're playing as well. So advanced states adds more state properties through tags. So if we look at it, you can add to that. This basically allows you to do more stuff with states. So if you have protective things, you can add protection and stuff like that. Damage absorption, damage reduction, multiplying parameters that you can normally only add, and adding to parameters that you can normally only multiply. You can also do ones that are evaluated in code. There's a bit with that, not necessarily a whole lot, because I need to minimize the states in this because I want to have each state have its own icon, and there's only so many icons in the game. And trying to make my own icons is something I can do, but having them be visually consistent with the built-in icons is a pain in the rear end. And I'm much more of a programmer designer than I am an artist. I can do some amount of pixel art work, but it tends to be something that can bog me down. So anyway, trying to have visually consistent with their built-in icon set is a pain and a lot of work, and a bit more than I want to try to spend time on, because that's something else that can bog me down. I use paint.net if I am editing those. And on the other hand, if I'm making my own icon set, then that just is super time-consuming. So condensed drops text right here does exactly what it says on the tin. It just takes the loot that enemies drop after battle. So for those, again, who may be unfamiliar or wanting to learn RPG Maker stuff off of this, you're welcome to be here. Hopefully you can learn stuff from me. I feel like I've got a lot to learn myself, but right here, this drop items thing gives you a chance to drop things. So I could have, 2 rats show up in a troop, right? Like this one. And each rat has a 1 in 5 chance, a 20% chance of dropping a fang. If they both drop a fang, which is a crafting material, then it will say, got fang in 2 separate lines. I'm gesticulating with my hand like you can see it. I don't have a webcam, so you can't, unfortunately. But it would have that line of text twice. And so what condensed drops does is it makes it so that way you say something like, you got 2 fangs. So if I really wanted to quickly demonstrate what this looks like, I could go to enemies, giant rat, and give it the ability to drop, let's say I want it to drop hide every single time. So in the normal functionality without that, actually, I can probably just go turn it off. Just to demonstrate what that looks like. So if I turn this off, and I go to probably the world, though, because I'm goofy and named things like that. And I go ahead and say, yeah, go ahead and spawn giant rats. One of the things that's cool about Overworld, by the way, is it will automatically set the appearance of your screen. I want this guy because McElroy has an absolutely ludicrous starting weapon that rats are weak to piercing damage, and he has a friggin' battle rifle, submachine gun or whatever. Yes, thank you. So the Mystical Journal is the journal plugin I'll talk about a bit later. But if I wander around a little bit, should get attacked by rats, and it's starting to turn nighttime. So you can see one of the other things that I've done is there's a plugin that makes the HP percentage show up after the enemy name. And apparently he got a chance to attack twice, so he's just going to take out all these rats. Oh, rats are fast there. Oh, somebody else is faster. Okay, yeah, he just shot the rat to death. It's a triple burst weapon, and they're super weak, and he got a critical hit, so it's a bit ridiculous. But yeah, so he took out the rats, and you can see 24 experience, $4 found, but then hide found. So it displays that twice. If I instead, let's just go ahead and save this to file 2, so that way we don't have to... If I go into condensed drops and I turn this on so that actually it uses the plugin, what you'll see when I kill more rats... Oh, hi, nighttime. Now it's morning and then day. Okay. Let's have everyone else target the other giant rat. Okay, good. Yep, that rat's dead now. And now it says 2 times hide found. So that's what condensed drops does, is it condenses that display. So that way when you have multiple of the same item, you don't get spammed with them. Now, I don't necessarily want rats to drop hides, but I don't know. That whole system's not in any way, shape, or form balanced in any way yet. And so, like, I could have, 100% chance to drop hide on each of these and have a battle of 12 rats, and it would just be 36 hides or fangs or whatever it was. And I don't want the game to sit there and make you scroll through individual lines of 36 of these. So instead I have it, say 36 times hide. So something to speed up the process of ending combat. Because one of the things that bothers me in RPGs is when the start and end of combat take a long time, because that's just wasting time in which I could be playing the game. I could be moving around, I could be engaging in the combat, I could be doing something interesting. And working through those post-battle screens is something that I wanted to be smoother. So I made that little plugin. It was surprisingly complicated. Then I have a crafting system that I've made. You spawn crafting stations with the crafting station index thing. So you specify crafting recipes. So what they create, whether an item, weapon, or armor, only the first one of these that's got filled in value will be used. So if I filled in item and armor, it would only make the item. And then you tell it how many of that item it makes, how much money is required to do the crafting, and then what materials are used. So this, for example, requires mystical dust, and requires 5 mystical dust and 2 iron ingots in order to be able to craft this item, the Magisteel ingot. I could add weapons and armors. It requires all of these items. And then the crafting stations right here, this name is just for internal use. It doesn't actually show up anywhere, but you just tell it which recipes it uses. The first one's index 0. These numbers here are all going to be off because it gives it line 1, line 2, but it's index 0, index 1. It's just something to deal with. I could make it work the other way, but I am too much of a programmer to do that. I'm going to eventually be filling out stuff there because I want some amount of crafting going on in this game. And then the crafting salvage extension is an extension to the crafting plugin, so it works with that crafting plugin we just looked at. And it automatically makes a special salvaging station. You can use, let's see, use the plugin command salvage to open up the salvaging station. And the way that so this tells you how much it costs to do a salvage. And what it basically does is it automatically adds recipes to the end. Again, I'm gesticulating with my hands, but you can't see them. It automatically makes salvaging recipes for each item that has a salvage item ID tag. So I can show you that in action over here. Again, I'm just going through what I've done previously on this. Oh yeah, these ellipses and spheres are crafting materials that don't have anything specified yet. But if I look at wing, a wing right now has salvage 10. Salvage 10 means it salvages into item 10, which is feathers. Obviously, wings salvaging into feathers makes a lot of sense. The way that it works, the system works, is that it takes the price of the item that you are salvaging and divides it by the price of the item it salvages into, and it will make a number of the item it salvages into based on that price. I think it's the floor of the division. So basically, it divides it and ignores the remainder, if I remember correctly with how that's set up. So in this case, I believe wings would salvage into 4 feathers. And there's some other things like that. But that's the basics of how the salvaging thing works. And that was because I wanted to have salvaging of equipment, because it's a way that you can add value to random crap drops that you get a bunch of. And again, a lot of this was inspired by the Guild Wars 1 crafting and salvaging systems, because that's how things work with me. So anyway, this extension allows that to work. And this describes it. Yeah, it's the floor of the division of the price of the salvaged item and the price of the crafting material it's being salvaged into. You can salvage something into anything. That's an item. So it can only salvage into items, but you can take it and be like, hey, I want this to salvage into keys for some random reason or something like that if you really wanted to. But it requires the interior crafting. And then, yeah, you can add this tag to items, armors, and weapons. So that's the salvaging plugin. This is the day-night cycle. I had the idea of wanting to add weather support to it, but that's just a lot of work. And day-night cycle is good enough for me that... So there's a couple of things stopping me from trying to do this more full-fledged. One of them is that RPG Maker is very limited in how it works, and you can add as much functionality as you want, but then you're writing a lot more code to rewrite stuff. And JavaScript is not my favorite language. I prefer something that is type defined, like C# or the C family of languages. So anyway, it just works. That's what I'm used to programming in. That's what I'm more comfortable with. So what I want to do is finish Astral Collision, and then I have some ideas for stuff that I want to experiment around with in Unity to try to make. So that's kind of where I see this series going eventually. But I don't know how long it's going to actually take to finish Astral Collision. So the way that this is basically a day-night cycle thing, and the way that it works is you set up locales. So there's some basic stuff. There's the length of a day, the length of evening. These lengths are just in arbitrary value amount that get incremented by walking some amount. I'll explain that in a moment, but you say how long day lasts, how long evening lasts, how long night lasts, and how long morning lasts. This is the index of the switch that will be turned on when it is night, so specifically nighttime, and turned off when it is during the day. I actually have plans to make use of that for like NPCs. Where will they be? But also to make use of that for like what am I doing with the audioscape. It's a very limited number of options, but I can show that in a moment. But also I believe I can reference this switch with battles to make it so that way certain enemies will spawn at night, and things like that. So that's something that I want to look into as well. And then the cycle change switch gets turned on when the cycle changes or when you first enter a zone, to let the system know that, hey, we changed zones, ergo we need to just immediately handle it becoming nighttime or daytime or whatever. So that way everything can be instantiated properly. But when it changes, this gets flipped. So that way if anything in that zone makes use of what the night switch is or what the current cycle is, that it can handle. So let me explain that in just a moment, and then I'll go into some of the more details. So here in Northern Village, which I'm working on, we have this right here. So if the day-night cycle has advanced switch is on, then if it's nighttime, fade out the background music and play background sounds. So this here is just this. So it's just nighttime sounds. It'll keep going until I tell it to stop. And then if it's not nighttime, it's daytime, then just play this song. I need to tell that to stop, or it's going to keep playing that too. So then it turns off the day-night cycle advance switch to say, hey, I've processed this. This is a parallel event, so it's going to be basically checking every frame or whatever and saying, hey, should I change things? One of the other things that you will see is if I go to this map, it says it's locale 1. So that's the other part. Like the world, though, is locale 0. So if I go back into the day-night cycle thing, we have the locales. So there's the world map locale, that's locale 0. Locale 1 is outside. Then there's inside, that's lit by fire. Inside, that's unlit. I'm probably going to add some other insides as well, because I'm going to need them at some point in time. But the way that this works is you give it a name. This is for your reference. The plugin doesn't care. It ignores that data. But, it's useful for you to know what it is. The day cycle advance rate. So this is basically how quickly the day-night cycle advances per step. So each time the party takes a step, the cycle counter advances 1 step, or advances the advance rate amount. So right here it's 40. If we go to these ones are not world map scale, so they cycle at a rate of 1. So basically what ends up happening practically is that the day-night cycle advances more quickly when you're outside of like a town or building or whatever. It advances more quickly. When you're inside them, it advances more slowly. And then we just have tinting parameters for how do you tint the screen when you're in this part of the day cycle. So day doesn't have any tinting effects for outside. Evening becomes more on the red, a bit less in the blue, and gets a little desaturated. Gray is basically saturation. So this affects some of the saturation, makes it a little bit more reddish, orangish. Night just makes things darker and more blue and less saturated. And morning was a pain in the butt to figure out. What this basically does is it amps up the blue quite a bit. I like the feel that it has. It gives me a strong feeling of morning time. But that's basically what these do. So locales are primarily for figuring out what should this locale look like for the tinting system. There's not proper lighting in the game, so this is kind of the best that I've got. And I don't want to try to figure out how to get proper lighting into this engine. That sounds like a pain in the butt. I know there's a bunch of additional plugins out there, like Yanfly stuff and things that I could look at if I wanted a bunch of additional functionality, but I kind of enjoy writing my own things and knowing how they work. So anyway, that's the day-night cycle thing. It's basically a very fancy way of messing with the tint system. That's really what it is. This is the enemy HP on target selection. So this will... this note is actually incorrect. Originally, it would show current HP amount out of maximum HP amount. I've changed it. Well, actually, there's a thing here to say whether or not it should be as a percentage or as just the raw values. I figured the percentage is a little bit better for my purposes for this game, so it's just as a percent. So that's all it does. Is like, hey, you're drawing the name of this enemy. You should append what percentage of HP they have left on them. You've seen that already anyway. Improved state visibility. So this changed the look of the battle screen substantially. And what that does is enemies, instead of rotating through their states, will now have a list of them above their head, and it completely reconfigures everything for the player battle screen. It moves where the menu things are, the menu selections are. So that way the player box can be extended and there's more room for states after all of the information about the individual players. So, and also right here, it makes all skills grouped into one skill command, so that way you're not having to dig through different menus to find your skills. All of your skills, regardless of their category, are all lumped in the same skill menu. I find that to be preferable. So anyway, that's what that does. Informative descriptions. Oh yeah, this one is really useful. It allows you to use brackets to mark areas that are going to have dynamic descriptions. I believe I added functionality as well for equipment. So to demonstrate what that does, I think there's some weapons that have this. Yeah, like this right here has these things where it's like, here's a bunch of code. It will just process that code. And turn it into a number and draw that number. There's a version of that for skills as well. So you can see that this says deals a.fire times 7. That will be replaced by a number that Incinerating Fury deals. That's how that works. Very, very useful for making informative descriptions, which is what that's for. Utility right now just has a get player region function, but if I have other utility functions that I want to add, I can just chuck them in there. This is primarily going to be useful for the overworld for determining what music to play, because I can say, hey, what's the player region? If the player region is in this range, this is how you handle the music. If it's in this range, this is how you handle the music, and so on and so forth. Then there's the journal, which has a bunch of entries and stuff. There's just a lot of functionality here. This was a pain in the butt to get working, but you can put in stuff like basic information, like strength, dexterity, fire. I haven't gone through and filled this out completely because it's a little bit tedious. That's something that I may do off camera. But I can fill in details of like, hey, what is the Astral Collision? So the Astral Collision was an event brought about by 14 powerful individuals and stuff. And so this is a spot for me to stick a bunch of lore. Basically, this came about because, I mean, a journal is kind of an obvious thing to want to have, but so yeah, there's a bunch of different categories for a bunch of different things. And you can have entries get unlocked through passing unlock strings and other stuff and all that sort of thing. Things like equipment will get unlocked when you first get them, and character entries for actors will display if the actor's in your party. But that plugin was added, or I originally wrote that plugin because I really like the storytelling that the Souls games do, but that doesn't work without having description space. So one of the things I was running into as a problem in this game is there's very limited amount of description room, or with this engine, I should say. There's very limited amount of description room on any given piece of equipment. So the ability to give story on item descriptions is very negligible. Most of that description space has to kind of go to describing what the piece of equipment does, especially in a game like this where it doesn't just add stats, right? Weapons have a specific attack range. I needed to be able to tell the player what effectiveness this weapon has and things like that. So because that limited space has to go, for practical reasons, to mechanical information rather than lore information, I wanted to have a way of adding lore information, and that's kind of what the journal is principally about. Then the Cath probably game over thing is, this is not a plugin that I made, obviously. It doesn't start with my name, nor is it called AC or whatever. But this is one that I got by an individual who went by Cath. I forget if it was like a forum or whatever, but one that I found while looking around for this sort of functionality that allows me to replace the game over with a common event. I don't like RPGs that are just like, oh, you died. I guess you are now being sent back to your last save. I don't like that functionality. So I didn't want to have it. And I don't want to have it in any of the RPGs I make, so I just drag this plug-in along with me. So I'm going to be like, yeah, no, that's not how this is going to work. AC modifications I went over extensively. This one right here, the graphics bug fix, is a very specific thing. I'm going to go over that in more detail because I think that one is something that is actually quite useful to be aware of. I think it happens in this one. Graphics.render? No, it might be core. Graphics.render. Not match case. Yeah, here we are. So this is how the graphics system renders code. And what happens is, what I think this is a modified version of it, actually. I think originally the default way this is written, this is an equal sign. So if the skip count is equal to 0, what this basically does is it like skips rendering some frames every now and then. For some reason, I'm not entirely sure why or exactly what's going on, but there's a bug that I've encountered every now and then where all of the functionality works, but it would just not render. And what ended up happening is that for some reason, just on very rare occasions, this skip count could get negative. And so when this said equals 0, then it would have to wait until it got down to 0. Now, normally it would be set to a value. Right here, you can see skip count equals math.min floor elapsed divided by 15. So floor is just saying, give me, the nearest integer, round down. Just round down always. So round down to elapsed divided by 15, and then take the smallest value between that and max skip. So max skip is just like, you won't skip more than this many frames. But if things got negative here, it would screw up, because what ended up happening is if skip count was equal to 0, then it would go ahead and I guess render everything and then say, okay, how many do we need to skip here? And theoretically this should be a positive value, and so it would say, hey, skip count is not equal to 0, therefore we need to decrease the skip count until we get down to 0, and we haven't rendered. And so once skip count would get down to 0, then it would render again. But if skip count ever got negative, you would have to wait for it to underflow in order to render again, which would take eons, potentially literally. It can take a very, 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 very long time. And so I discovered this bug when I was trying to figure out what was going on. So if anybody has ever encountered a bug where it's just suddenly RPG Maker just stops drawing things, like you can still use menus and hear, and you can tell you can hear you can tell that you can still use menus because you can hear sound. Probably what's happened is you've gotten a negative skip count, and that has landed you in an not technically an infinite loop, functionally an infinite loop, because you have to wait for this to count. Like, if this is an int that's being sorted in a 32-bit int, that takes like 4 billion skipped render frames, so it's just not practical to get back down to 0. So having the less than equal to 0 means that, hey, if skip count ever gets negative, it will just render the next frame and continue on. So basically this fixed version of it is what the graphics fix does. It just says, hey, use this version that's not busted. And it does. So that's an overview of the plugins that I've got going on. So what I've done already is I've set up my actors. I've figured out what their various classes are going to be. They're all just set to specific classes. So we have Angel here is just the starting player party select character that gets removed from the party permanently after the introduction. So we have the Knight, which has specific properties about how it's supposed to work. For example, it draws more aggro because it has a higher target rate, has higher HP and stuff like that. The Whammo, which is a support character, like a support physical attacker. It's a play on the warrior monk way that Guild Wars 1 would do that. The Telenergist, which is supposed to be a little bit more like the Mesmer. It cares about MP and does stuff with that. So it's kind of flavored a little bit like that, at least for me. And then we have a whole block of different mage types that are elemental mages. So I have the 4 base elements in the game. This whole thing's probably just going to be like, what am I doing? So I have the whole 4 base elements of fire, water, wind, and earth. And then I was like, okay, so what happens if I add them together? And I could get 6 elements out of that. So fire plus water is light, fire plus wind is lightning, fire plus earth is metal, water plus wind is ice, water plus earth is darkness, and wind plus earth is life. That's how I ended up deciding to do that. So I have 6 casting professions: the Prismage, the Sorcerer, the War Mage, the Blizzagus, the Warlock, the Druid, and the Druid. These 6 are all... Basically, they've picked 2 of the 4 simple elements, I guess, to use, and then that simple elements combine elements. So, for example, the Druid is focused on wind and earth and also life. The Warlock on water and earth and then darkness. Water, wind, and ice, etc. And then I just had some other random physical attackers. So I have the Special Forces operative, the Ranger, which is more focused on conditions and has resistance to all the conditions. They all have sets of weapons they can use and things like that. The Ninja, focused on speed. The Berserker is a counterpart to the Whammo. So while the Whammo is a physical attacker who gets a bunch of TP spells that support the party, the Berserker is a physical attacker who gets a bunch of TP offensive spells to attack the enemy. And then the Sage, which is just kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. So it gets access to every single type of weapon, every single type of armor the Sage can wear. Has a bunch of kind of standard stats with things. Gets healed a little bit better than other classes by default as well. And we'll learn all of the standard skills. So I'll get into that now, I guess. That brings us to a spreadsheet. Because game design involves spreadsheets quite often. So I was trying to figure out character growth and what makes that interesting. And so I actually kind of evaluated Pokemon a little bit. And what I ended up deciding is I wanted to have specific ranges in which characters would get skills. So these are alternating in groups. So starting skills learned in the levels 2 to 9, skills learned in the range 10 to 18, 19 to 27, etc., all the way up to 91 to 99. And so I've divided it up into each character gets, this many skills, which I think is 22? 22 skills. I can quickly just do this, and it'll tell me count 22. So each character will learn 22 skills over the course of leveling up. But I don't want to make 22 unique skills for all of the characters. That sounds like a giant pile of work. So what I've ended up doing is saying, okay, so there are going to be 10 common skills that characters learn. So those are the skills over here in green that are labeled common skill. I probably should zoom this in a little bit, but here we are. Can I? I don't know. This is not a normal browser. This is what I call a standalone browser window, as you can tell by its lack of things. So I don't know that it has zooming functionality. It's just using the Chromium NuGet package for anybody wondering, and it's just basically a Windows form wrapper around that to make a easy browser window that doesn't have a bunch of other crap brought along with it. So anyway, each character would have 10 common skills that they would get and 12 unique skills, just to kind of manage things, and also to make it so that way there's a little bit of variety in the application of the common skills. So if a character has a common skill and another character has that same common skill, the stats are going to be a little bit different on them. Plus, the common skills then give me a pile of skills to use with enemies. It's kind of the idea. So I broke out what that means. So 156. So there's 156 unique skills because there are 12 unique skills per character, and then 13 characters. 13. Whoop. Nope. Nope. Just leave it. There are 13 classes that get unique skills. The Sage class will get all of the common skills. So the Sage class is going to get a ridiculous number of skills, but it's not going to get any unique skills. So that's what's what's going on with that, and that's kind of one of its things. So there are a bunch of common skills I needed, and what I basically was figuring out is like, okay, how many common skills do I need? 12 attacks, 10 martial status skills, 12 spells, and 10 magical status skills is how I kind of broke it down. Because I did a bunch of math. This is C3 is this guy. Right here. So it's this one divided by 3. Why was I dividing it by 3? I forget. But whatever. Oh yeah. Because I want each common skill to go to 3 different characters. That's why. So, because each common skill is going to 3 different characters, I need to divide it by 3 so I could figure out how many I actually needed to make. And so I'm like, well, I need to be able to give a whole to the characters. Like, I can't just give a character a third of a skill. I mean, technically that would be making a common skill for one character, but making a common skill for one character is called a unique skill, so it's not a common skill. So, I just rounded that up to 44. And because that's, what that would be 43 and okay, I can't have a third of a skill, so I need to make the full 4th skill. So 44 skills split up this way, and kind of figuring out the schedule of what they're going to get. They're going to get a lot of common skills early. Basically, in each level up range, they get a unique skill, and then the number of common skills they get per level up range decreases as they get higher level. I don't really know what the pacing is going to end up working out like. I hope players get up into this range. I kind of want to make sure it kind of goes there, but I kind of want it to go there if you're kind of doing most of the stuff in the game. So it's going to require a lot of balancing tweaks to figuring out how much experience points players should get from stuff. And then I was just trying to figure out, okay, what are special properties that fire, water, earth, and wind have? This right here, this is a separate block. This block, I will put boundaries around that. This block is just saying, okay, what do each of the elements create for their advanced element? So fire has a special property of being able to remove buffs. Water has a special property of being able to remove conditions. Earth has a special property of being able to remove debuffs. And wind has a special property of being able to remove auras. So auras and conditions, basically I have the conditions are all negative things that you don't want on you that you can inflict, and they're associated with things. So for example, rage is associated with fire, confusion is associated with water. And so there's a bunch of these. There's poison, which causes 10% HP degeneration. Blind, which decreases hit rate a lot. So there's chances that you'll actually miss. Silence, which prevents you from using skills. Rage, which makes you have to attack an enemy. You don't get a choice, and you also take double damage. Confusion, which means that you attack anyone. Fascination, which means that you attack allies. Sleep, which means you can't do anything, and your evasion rate goes away, basically. This is practically speaking going to increase the damage you take as well, I believe, at least from physical attacks. Paralyzed, which what I have this do actually is it makes your MP cost rates shoot through the roof. 2.5 times multiplier on your MP costs. Cursed. So this one, you have to look down here for what this does. This basically makes you, whenever you hit with an attack, like a physical attack, then you take, basically whenever you deal damage with the calc weapon damage function, you get a negative vampiric value, which means you will take damage equal to the high damage roll that you could potentially have. So this basically makes you hurt yourself when you attack things, is what Curse does. Fear is associated with metal for whatever reason, because I was trying to figure out what things are. It kills your critical hit rate and gives you MP and TP degeneration. And then I've been applying buffs, which will use the icons for each element. So metal is that icon, and earth is that one. And so these are all auras. Some of them I've figured out, some of them I've not. So like I haven't figured out what I want the fire and ice buffs to be. This is going to be lightning reflexes, which is a state that gives you a pretty decent chance to counter attacks. Absorption here gives you the ability to absorb damage up to 10% of your HP. I guess that's your current HP. I don't know if I'm going to want to change that or not. But basically, every time you take damage, there's a 25% chance that this effect will end, but you'll also get healed up to a 10th of your current HP. I might want to make that MHP, actually. Feels like that should be MHP, not... Or maybe it... Oh, I think it might need to actually be Maybe it needs to be MHP. I don't remember. That's a really weird spot. So I should actually look at advanced states. This is how this goes. Because this is a really weird spot. Yeah, okay. It should be MHP. Not your current HP. I haven't figured out the metal, wind, and light buffs yet. Then there's Vampiric Aura, which is the dark buff. It just gives you Vampiric equal to a 20th of your max HP. Rejuvenation gives you 10% HP regeneration. Comforting Earth gives you better recovery effect, and you take a third damage from sources that protects you. And then there's a couple of physical auras. So there's Honed Weapon that increases your weapon damage by 50%. There's Dodge, which gives you really high evasion rates for a turn. There's Keen Eye that increases your critical rate. And if you critical hit, then you'll gain energy and TP based on your dex and strength. So this is a really good state to have. So I'm just kind of working on filling out some of these states and whatnot. But there's only so many that I can give you because there's only so many icons I have to work with. I have these to work with, and a bunch of them are used for stuff. So it's like this collection of things is what I've got to work with. Yeah. So that, and then I basically try to make a weapon for an armor for every single icon. So there's a bunch of those. I'm not going to go over all of that in exhaustive detail because I'm a little tired of talking, but you can see there's a bunch of different weapons here, a bunch of different armor types, categories, and then here's these types. So piercing, striking, and slashing are predominantly are physical attacking types, and then these are all magical types. And then we've got terms, things like, oh, M attack is fire, and all that sort of stuff, and changes there. Your airship's going to be helicopter, whenever it is that you get that. That's cool. I've tweaked some of the sound effects for things. That screen, which you've seen. Let's see. Is there anything else worth mentioning at the moment? I don't know. I've got a bunch of crafting materials. Oh, there's a subway ticket system. So I guess I should go over that idea too. The idea here is that, so there's a subway station access. You go into here, and when you step into this, the transition that you use to step into this will set what subway station this is. And then it takes you down to here, and what subway this is. These are buses. Eventually, I do want to try to make a bullet train type sprite, but that's low priority at the moment. So the basic idea is that you come to this station and you're like, hey, I want to take a subway ticket to here. And this exit right here is going to be calibrated to what station index you're currently on. And so when you exit here, you will exit to different stations. So they're all going to look the same, all of the subway station access and subway stations. The idea is that you're taking elevator here down to here. And that will allow you to be able to pop out at different parts of the world. So, for example, where does that one... Where does the current one exit out? I can check right here. Oh, this just loops back in on itself, doesn't it? Yeah, it just loops back in on itself right now. But eventually, I'm going to just be setting up... This is the fast travel system. And the way that it's going to work is you can go here and you can buy subway tickets to different locations, and then you can talk to one of these train parts in these finger air quotes you can't see. and use that to travel to the destination of your choice. So that's how I'm planning on setting up the fast travel system, is just having a bunch of these subways with this underground kingdom that will exist and be a place. So yeah, that's the overview of what is going on so far in this project. And this is the inside of a smokehouse because I don't have a good smokehouse icon. And so what my main priority is right now is to just build up this world map with areas. So this thing is just a big looping world map, and I've got it decently populated with stuff right now, and I just need to fill in some more areas on it. So that's going to be kind of my next major priority. This video's probably gone on long enough that I don't think I'm going to do it in here. But that's something that I will probably do next time, is just like, if I've added stuff, I'll go like, hey, I've added a few things, and then maybe record more working on them. I don't know. Let me know what you think would be the most useful parts of this, but there's probably going to be a lot of I'm just working on this on screen and getting some of the rubber duck effect, which is a programming term for you could have solved your problem by talking to a rubber duck. But because you have to externalize by talking to something, you go to another person and you talk to them, and in the process of explaining the problem to them, you solve it. The process of explaining the problem to you, the viewer, will help me to be able to solve the problem. So that's an overview. If there are any questions about what's going on in any of this, any questions on stuff that I've done so far, go ahead and leave them in the comments. I won't necessarily be able to answer every question, but I would, if there's enough, or I might not have the technical knowledge for certain questions, but yeah. So I need to fill in stuff here, fill in some islands around. I guess that will just be a thing that I do later, though. So until next time, everyone, when I continue this in a week, thank you for joining me. I hope you are as interested in doing this as I am in making it, and I hope that it's something that can be an enjoyable and entertaining watch, and something that will result in a final product that people will enjoy playing. So until next time, take care and goodbye.